He's one of the industry's most respected executive recruiters. He's the founder and CEO of the DEDIC Group and the host of DEDIC TV, Jason DEDIC.
Hello everyone, I'm Jason DEDIC and you're listening to DEDIC TV. To kick off DEDIC TV, I've decided to make a few episodes on topics and questions that I get on a daily basis. Being that I am the founder and CEO of an executive search firm, I want to talk about this important topic that I hear constantly: the difference between retained and contingency recruitment. First and foremost, the most important difference between retained and contingency is the industry knowledge that the recruiter will have. Retained recruiters have a very narrow, yet a very deep industry competence. For example, we only recruit for construction and engineering firms that build power infrastructure. Whereas contingency recruiters, they're much more broad. They'll typically work 5, 6, maybe even 7 different industry sectors at the same time. Now, why is this important? Retained recruiters will have a very strong relationship base with the executives that need to be contacted and interviewed for any role that's at hand. Although contingency recruiters will often deliver candidates much faster than a retained search firm, the quality is much stronger with retained firms. Now, how are these candidates recruited? A retained search firm will specialize specifically in directly recruiting executives from your direct competition, whereas the main candidate flow with a contingency search firm will always come from job boards. Now, what's the difference in the interview process? The DEDIC Group will always interview every candidate face-to-face and perform not just technical and operational evaluations, but will execute a full cultural evaluation of each candidate. Now, this is done to evaluate if the candidate will be able to assimilate into the organization's corporate culture successfully. Now, I do go into much greater detail on this on DEDIC TV on an episode called Our Recruitment Process. With a contingency search firm, they conduct typically a phone interview and a quick pre-screen of a candidate. Then they'll present them over to the client, and then the full vetting and qualification process is still left up to the client. This is why contingency search firms will typically deal with internal HR and your internal recruitment department versus the executive or the client or hiring manager themselves. Let's talk about the representation and loyalty between the two different types of firms. Retained search firms, such as the DEDIC Group, represent the interest of the client company. Contingency recruiters represent candidates. This is a very, very clear distinction. In a retained model, candidates are only presented to the organization that has retained the services of the firm. Now, if you look at a contingency model, that same candidate that you're already interviewing may also be interviewing with up 4, 5, maybe even 6 different companies at the same time. Now, what's the major problem with this is that if 2 companies make an offer to the same candidate, you're in a price war. And that's the worst position to be in when you're trying to bring on a new leader. How many numbers of searches are worked at a given time between the 2 different firms? Whereas in a retained search model, we will never work more than 3 or 4 searches at the same time because we want to make sure and guarantee that we can devote the right amount of time and resources to execute this search correctly. If you look at a contingency search firm, their numbers are much higher. They're going to work upwards of 20, 25, sometimes even 30 searches at any given time. Now, how much time is devoted to a search? In a retained model, we'll work until the search is completed, until it's filled. Since the client has retained the services of the firm, you're actually required to execute this search until completion. A contingency firm, they work quite differently. They'll typically spend maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks at most on any given search at a given time. If the candidates are not identified within these times, they have to move on. I've actually personally worked in a contingency environment before, and I fully understand why. The role of a contingency recruiter is to get as many resumes and as many candidates in front of a client as fast as possible and hope something sticks. Because they're only compensated if a candidate is hired. They can't devote the long time and the hours and all of the resources to a search if they don't see a solid end in sight. Another really important topic on the difference between retained and contingency is how the job description is created and the information known about the role. A retained recruiter will work very closely with the client to shape and build the job description from the start. This includes everything from the deliverables that are expected out of the candidate and what time frame they are expected in, how the objectives will be executed, and how the organization is run as a whole. Retained recruiters will also have a very deep understanding of the organization's corporate culture. Contingency recruiters work differently. They work off of the generic corporate job description that's created either by HR or by the client. This information can be very minimal, and it will leave the recruiter actually not fundamentally understanding what needs to be executed in this role. Even past the job description, let's talk about onboarding. Retained recruiters work the whole onboarding process. We will line candidates up with moving companies, coordinate with realtors, search for schools and doctors. We'll get referrals. We'll take them out on visits. We'll actually fly out with candidates and tour the city. Contingency recruiters do absolutely none of that. If you look at the guarantees, the financial guarantees, the DEDIC Group has a 100% money-back guarantee for a year. This includes the retainer. If for any reason we are unable to identify and deliver qualified candidates with the agreed-upon time frame, we just refund the retainer. If you look at a contingency search firm, they'll typically offer either a 30, 60, or a 90-day refill guarantee. If the candidate is terminated or decides to resign within that period, they'll redo the search at no additional cost. There's one major issue with this. It's not enough time to figure out if that candidate is qualified within 30, 60, or 90 days. And quite frankly, if they weren't able to execute the search correctly the first time, why would you want them to do it the second time? Let's take a look at some of the misconceptions of retained search versus contingency search. One of the major misconceptions is that a recruiter should only be retained for senior executive level roles. My firm has shown that that's not the case. The level of the position in question doesn't dictate if a search should be conducted on a retainer or a contingency. If you need the services and you need the deliverability of a retained executive recruiter, whether it's due to the sense of urgency, if it's a confidential search, whatever the situation so happens to be, then a retained model is a superior model. The model is proven to work better and to deliver more qualified candidates than a contingency model time and time again. That's why the corporate leadership roles, executive vice presidents, CEOs, board members, are only done on retained search. Another misconception is that a recruiter's fees are always paid up front, 100% of them. As a matter of fact, we only charge 1/3 of the fee up front. And as I said earlier, it's 100% refundable if for any reason we do not deliver as promised. Let's take a look here at the expectations of an executive recruiter. The most significant misconception between the two different recruiting models, contingency and retained, is what the two recruiters are actually hired to do. Retained recruiters are hired to identify, interview, recruit, and fully vet and qualify executives directly from your competition, whereas contingency recruiters, their entire model is proven to be a resume service. Take a look at the searches that you have coming up in the future. What model will work better for you? Thanks a lot for listening to DEDIC TV. For other episodes, please visit us at DEDIC.TV.